everything you're doing, no matter who you are on the team, has something to do with strategy and operation. Again, it's what are we going to do? Why are we going to do it? And then how are we going to do it?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the BizDev Podcast, the podcast about developing your business. I'm David Baxter, your host, joined per usual by Gary Voigt, who I just learned does not know where buttons live, which is hard considering the fact that you make them for a living. He couldn't figure out how to turn on the podcast, and so that's where we're delayed. I don't know. We don't do it live, so you don't know we're delayed, but it took Gary.
No one would have ever known until you called me out like this. This is embarrassing.
It's true.
I feel like I'm witnessing some deep-seated family dysfunction here.
It's not very deep-seated. It's right there on the surface.
Right on the surface.
He's a UX designer who has no idea what a button is. It's a real problem. It's a real problem.
They should change the color and make it larger. That's what every UX designer I've ever worked with does.
In my defense, I'm pretty good at, I don't know, just making it pop.
Not this shade of orange, this shade of orange.
Yeah.
Make it pop. And make my logo bigger. That's how we do our job, everybody. All right. More importantly, that other voice you hear is Brian Waldman, who is a strategy and operations consultant. Welcome, Brian.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, David. Hey, Gary, thanks for having me.
All right. So the first question, it just speaks for itself. What the heck is a strategy and operations consultant?
Yeah. And some companies have formal strategy and operations departments. Most big companies do. But I think strategy and operations as a combination is what operational leaders do, right? There's a component of being an operations leader, which is leading day to day, making sure the trains are arriving on time. And to me, the maybe more fun part of that job is figuring out what the heck are trains and why do we have them and what are they supposed to do? So if you are a real deep operations person, like I hope to consider myself, then strategy and operations go hand in hand. And to me, you can't really have one without the other.
So obviously this is a bigger company problem. We have a director of operations. His name is Carl, but it's just him and me, and sometimes Gary if it's off of a bender or something. And that look on his face is priceless. You can't see it if you don't watch the video. You should watch the video just for his face. Anyway, it's really low key, right? Because we're a small company. So what does that mean? What does strategy and operations consulting do for that big, like you mentioned the trains and whatever, of widgets and doodads that you build? I'm trying to figure out what is the difference between our casual conversations when we're talking about leading our company, pretty low stakes as it were, and you're running Amazon. Like what does an operations consultant do in that case?
Yeah. So, putting the consultant part of it aside, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a consultant. Many of the internal people at companies are strategy and operations teams. But I think at startups, the distinction between strategy and operations doesn't exist because they are all encompassing. When you are at a startup and you're in especially early stages, everything you're doing, no matter who you are on the team, has something to do with strategy and operation. Again, it's what are we going to do? Why are we going to do it? And then how are we going to do it is that combination of strategy and operation. So to me, anything that has anything to do with product development, go-to-market strategy, project management, it's all strategy and operations. I use that for shorthand to say general manager, COO, strategy and operations. To me, those are all the same thing. And I think while startups don't have those as formal teams, it's because everybody at a startup is doing some form of strategy and operations.
So you're given your ideal client, you wake up, you get 2 weeks with them.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What are you doing for them?
I would hope the engagement wouldn't be 2 weeks because not a lot's going to happen.
Fair. So that's a fair question. Yeah. What is a typical engagement if you were brought in by let's say not obviously Amazon, that's a little crazy. Sure. Normal sized, small, medium sized business.
So typically the beginning of the engagement is, why the heck do you guys need me? Why am I here? What do you need done? What are the problems that you think are holding your business back from whatever the goal, right? So there's usually some event, some sort of challenge they're facing or, goal that they have that they want to meet or are not meeting that causes them to say, we don't have the skills internally that we need in order to achieve whatever it is we're trying to achieve. So to me, the beginning part is all about trying to understand what is that goal and why is it important to you and why are you feeling like you can't achieve it? And then eventually over the course of conversation or a couple of days, that leads to a deep dive into the organization, how they're running things, where their bottlenecks are, who's being empowered, who's not being empowered. And then sometimes it turns out that the goal that they had originally isn't really the problem, right? Sometimes the problem is somewhere else. So the beginning of any engagement, whether it's a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month, is about understanding the lay of the land, the root cause analysis on the problems, and understanding, okay, now that we've identified what we want to impact, how are we going to impact it? And does the organization have the skills, people, budget in place to do that? Because a lot of the times the answers to those questions are yes and no. So then that leads to a set of recommendations and leave once the recommendations are made. I'm a practical person. I grew up in startup land. So there's no sense of dropping off a white paper of what should be done. To me, it's like these things now need to be executed, and I'm here to help with that execution, whether that's at a high level with setting KPIs and goals, and you're managing to those KPIs and goals, helping the management team do that, or doing whatever areas of work in the organization are not skill sets that they already have in place.
So practically speaking, do you find when you go into organization, do you find the issue is a knowledge issue or is it more of a people issue?
I think it's hard to separate those things because it's usually both, right? There's usually really good, well-intended people who may have a knowledge gap or an experience gap that is impacting the organization's ability to hit a goal. Sometimes they don't even have the right people in place to be able to do that, right? So there's always an examination of, do we have the right people? And then, do we have the budget? Do we have the technology? Do we have the willingness to make the commitment necessary to do all the things that are necessary? So it's usually not one thing or the other. It's usually a combination of a bunch of things.
Do you have maybe a set of 2 or 3 common areas that you're finding with like small or medium-sized businesses?
Yeah. So a lot of times there's usually two sorts of issues that I tend to deal with, right? One is a go-to-market, customer acquisition, product, price, place, promotion sort of thing, right? Marketing, sales. And in a lot of cases, the companies have, struggled to achieve their goals in those areas. And a lot of times that's because of either unrealistic expectations, unrealistic budget allocations, or like you were mentioning, maybe not the right people in the right positions. So there's that stuff. And then there's we feel like we've got the right product, price, place, promotion, and the right people in place, but it's not working. And so there it turns into more of an operational exploration of why isn't it working? Do we have bottlenecks? Are there things that we're doing that just processes could be improved, efficiencies could be gained? And so you start at the top and work your way down until you run into where you believe the real problems are. And it's usually not, like I said, not just one place.
It sounds a lot like what we got from that book, Traction.
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely going to be a lot of overlap here. Yeah, he's going to
Yeah.
implement maybe not the on-brand traction, but I imagine you're bringing in a lot of those same principles. Do you find the main value that most companies have is simply that you're a third-party observer, right? You can say, Bob here sucks, and Bob here needs to go away. Now, obviously, you're going to be way more tact than that.
Sure.
Everyone knows Bob sucks, and everyone knows he's the problem. He's someone's uncle or whatever, and
Sure.
you can't get rid of him because of human. And you come in there and you're like, yeah, we're just going to, the elephant in the room is Bob sucks. Is that the value you often bring?
I think if I bring, it's not a value to Bob. I think if I do bring that, it's accidental, right? Because that's certainly not the intention, is to go in and find problems that are people related and provide cover, if you will, for a CEO to make a decision that's been obvious that maybe he or she and everybody else in the organization all along, right? If I'm coming in and that's what you're hoping to get from me, then there probably are easier ways for you to do that. You should be looking in a mirror and deciding if you're a leader or not, if you can't make those decisions yourself. So I would say, like, when those things happen, it's accidental. More often than not, it's a skill set gap that exists that the company would acknowledge it exists, or just, hey, we don't know how to take the next step. And I think it takes a lot of courage for organizations to do that and to admit that they need help and to reach out to someone like me who has a very broad background in multiple disciplines in business. I've led marketing, sales, operations, huge tech projects, product management, HR. I've very highly focused on organizational design and hiring. So like when you bring someone on who's a generalist, who has done a lot of different things, I can dig in and understand a lot of different areas very quickly. And I think that's why organizations hire me. It's more practical. It's more based on being able to bring tangible and reasonable guidance that can be well executed and will lead to good outcomes rather than some sort of either high level strategy or to do the dirty work because they're scared of firing Bob.
So do you follow like a curriculum or a favorite book or process that you have, or maybe it's a secret sauce of amalgamation of several of these books? What are your faves on this when you're doing this?
I'm a big book listener. So if anyone asks me, have I read this book or that book, I'm always a little bit queasy about answering because the answer is no, but I've listened to it, probably, maybe. But also, I think I've done so many different things and been involved in so many different situations in my career, different organizations, different sizes, that it's this combination in a cloud of things I've read and learned through listening, learning formally. I have 2 master's degrees also that hope those taught me some things. But the larger portion of, I hope, what I bring to an organization is the experiences that I've gained directly. I know a lot of I couldn't formally list off all these different consulting formulas, but I know there are some, right? But for me, it's more like I've been there and I've done that. So I don't really need or want to necessarily work within a framework. What I have is the ability to get to root cause, the ability to understand the reasons behind things, and therefore the ability to go to whoever's hired me, the CEO, whoever, president, or whatever it is, and say, hey, look, I've been listening and here's what I've learned. And typically I get a lot of nods. And then I say, and here's how I think we can fix it. And I'll usually present some sort of formal write-up, including a plan, and I get a lot of nods. And those don't necessarily follow a framework or structure because they're going to change from client to client, but I'm sure that they were all informed by formal frameworks and structures that I've either seen or listened to in the past.
It reminds me early on. So we focus really heavily on UX. That's our thing.
Sure.
And I've been doing that for longer than it was cool.
Right.
And what was funny is early on, it's like you talk to a UX firm and they talk about process this and process that and this degree and that degree. And our stuff has all been experiential, right? There's so many times that we know what works. Now, Gary does have some of the formal fancy stuff, but we don't give that any credit.
But you just don't give Gary any credit.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Sorry. Thanks for the correction.
But
But it is interesting because it's like sometimes you get when you're old, like Gary, you have lots of experience that's even pre some of these things. And it's like there was no books when we were doing it originally. We were doing in flow and it made sense to us to a point. Now, we follow that stuff off and on now, but it is just interesting. It's like, where did you do this, that, and the other? And I'm like, I don't know. I wasn't in school at that point. I'd been doing this for 10 years. But no, I totally get that.
Yeah, and it's hard, right? In your case, I'm sure if you have a client who wants to engage in a very formal way and they're expecting a long presentation that you've spent hours and hours writing up and justifying your recommendations, to me, when you hire a big consulting firm, you're spending a lot of money on that and not a lot of money on someone who really, truly understands your business and can lead and help you to lead with impact and make a difference quickly. So I think I'm a startup person at heart, and startup people typically don't use frameworks and rubrics to say, hey, this is what I think we should do.
So you've worked with a lot of leaders. Oh, were you going to say something, Gary? Sorry, I didn't want to.
I was just going to say, coming from a design perspective, and the same token, the experience is really the value that you're bringing, especially in your case, the experience of having been able to not just consult, but work in these several different facets of the company or large companies. So regardless of how polished the presentation is or how many different kind of classes or philosophies you cite, like in our case with the UX, there's 15 to 16 different kind of gestalt and all kinds of philosophies that you could just go wax poetic forever. But at the end of the day, none of that's really important. when the client is paying for your experience and your knowledge over,
Yeah.
the fancy structure of delivery.
I feel like you said that way better than I did, Gary. So thank you.
No, don't give him
No,
compliments.
well, I use
Just
a
go
best practices formula in order to say that. No, I'm just kidding.
I
straight
think
to his
Gary
head.
needs support, so I'm going to make sure to throw him some props.
Man, I'm
Thanks,
never gonna hear
Brian.
the
I
end of this.
You
appreciate
bet.
that.
You're gonna be his favorite guest of all time.
Big Pixel builds world-class custom software and amazing apps. Our team of pros puts passion into every one of our projects. Our design-infused development leans heavily on delivering a great experience for our clients and their clients. From startups to enterprises, we can help craft your ideas into real-world products that help your business do better business.
So when you're talking about leaders, and I know that was a big part of working with them, how do you see them as a business scales and changes? How do you
Yeah.
see a leader's role changing?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because in the startup world, if you look specifically at startup founders, on day one, you're mopping the floor, creating the business model, trying to hire people who believe in your vision, begging for investors, right? That's a skill set that is very unique to startup founders. And then on year one, you're hopefully hiring a leadership team and refining your strategy and starting to delegate responsibilities. And then on year three, you're dealing with quarterly business updates to your investors and board meetings and leading managers who are leading teams. And all of those different stages require a real shift in priority and focus. And I said before that I don't often quote like things I've read, but I've read recently a Harvard Business Review article that said something to the effect of by year three, 50% of startup CEOs are out of their roles. 50%, right? So I think this speaks to the point that you're talking about is your role as in a startup as a founder or a co-founder in any level changes dramatically. And in the startup world, you just don't have time to fail to make the transition. If you fail to make the transition from like scrappy startup founder who's willing to do whatever it takes every day to a leader of people and strategic view on the company and goal setting and things like that, then you're going to be out. And it's tough because on the one hand, that's the right thing to have happen, right? You should have the right people at the right time in the right leadership roles. And at the other time, like that really stinks for the founder, right? Because they wanted to be the CEO ringing the bell at the NASDAQ saying, hey, we made it, right? We went public. And the truth is that rarely happens. What usually happens is either the startup founder is asked to leave or whoever the first person leading the marketing department is asked to leave. Or if, they want to stay, they end up in a position reporting to someone else who was brought in to take on. Compare, and sorry to make one more point, but compare that to a big company. If you get promoted at a big company, it's not expected that a year later or 6 months later, you're going to get promoted again. What's expected is that you're going to take a year or 2 or 3 to learn the skills that you need in this new role now to lead a bigger team, to be more strategic and, leading through other leaders than directly on line level employees. So like at a big company, that's part of the business model. That's expected. At a startup, there's none of that. So at some point, pretty much every startup founder reaches the point where they just don't have those skills to lead at that level. And it's either they're going to learn how to do it very quickly because they're naturally gifted in that way, or they're going to be replaced one way or another.
It reminds me of Kurt, someone saying, I don't think it was somebody famous. Gary's going to make fun of me here because I'm horrible at attribution. But it was someone just was quoting someone else. So it's not even that. But it was basically people are promoted to the max level of their competency. And so it's like when you reach it, that's as far as you're going to go because this is all you can do. And that's one of the reasons why large companies have a bunch of bad middle managers because that's as good as they can possibly get. And they're just stuck there. And I think CEOs, me and my son had an argument the other day, speaking of CEOs, in his mind, now he's 19, in his mind, a CEO is just plays golf all day. That's what he's like. They're making these millions of dollars, and all they do is everyone else is doing the real hard work. And I tried to explain to him, I was like, someone like Tim Cook, right? Now that's the highest of the high, but there's only maybe 10 people in the world who could do his job.
Sure.
Because he's going to go talk to the president and convince him to change his tariffs, right? That is something very few people on this planet can do. And explaining that to a 19-year-old does not go over well, by the way. But I just find that interesting. Is like that skill set is so amorphous at some point when you get to those levels. Even at my level, I'm leading a small company, but I would say 2 people in my company have any idea what I do on a day-to-day basis. They have no idea.
Sure.
Not that it's something magic. It's just it doesn't affect them as long as the lights stay on. The only thing that actually affects it. But it is interesting how people change throughout. And some people don't have those skills. I'm not sure I would ever be able to lead a $1 billion company. I don't think I have those skills. I certainly would upset someone at that point. But but I've been able to morph as my company has needed me. But I do want to ask, though, you were saying that often the CEO has to, or the founder has to leave. Do you think that company suffers because of a loss of that founder charisma? You know, there's a concept that founders have that you just know you're a founder, that there's something in you, and you have that passion, that love, that it's your baby, that whole thing.
Sure.
Do you discount that? Do you think that actually has value? And when that person steps aside, whether it's to a lower level or completely, do you think that company suffers as a result?
Yeah, and that's a good question. So my instinct here is that it takes that passion, right? I like to say that all founders are delusional, right? At some level, they're all delusional because the majority of them are going to fail. And that's just the data just proves that to be true, right? So in order to be a founder, you have to have this delusion that your business is going to be one of those that does not fail. And I don't think you can get a startup off the ground without that delusion. So that delusion is a great thing when you're in year 1 and year 2. And hopefully you're building that same level of delusional belief into your employees at that stage, right? Because they've taken a job that pays them less money, probably. And in exchange, you're giving them more responsibility, which is going to turn around and slap them in the face often, because now they're going to think they're a VP when, they're really not. And, they're going to work for equity that they think someday is going to be worth $1 million, which probably it isn't. But so at the beginning, there's this sort of, we're all in this together. We're doing this crazy thing. Nobody believes in us mentality. And at some point, the company, like in your scenario, gets to this inflection where, okay, but there's actual things that need to be getting done that aren't getting done, or skills that need to be brought to the table from a leadership perspective that we don't have. And so the question of, does the company suffer for that, I think is reflective of a couple things. Did the founder establish and build a culture that is sustainable without them? And if you've done that, then I think kudos to you, because that's really hard to do. But more likely, I think, like at that stage in a startup, everybody knows, is this the CEO that's going to lead us to the promised land or not? And people aren't dumb, maybe not. And I think then it's about, who do they bring in? And does the person that they bring in respect and understand why we're all here and what our values are that we've established? And hopefully those are good values, right? People feel enthusiastic, and the person who they bring in shares that enthusiasm and respects the people that got it to this point and treats them well. And then I think it's really, easier anyway to have a transition and to keep that culture and keep that spirit. But if, the new person comes in and it's like, all of you people over here stink, you're all out, I'm bringing in my people, like, now what do you have left? You have the product and whatever success you've had, but you have none of the sort of camaraderie and ethic and values
Culture
that the CEO helped to create. That would be all culture. So I think it really is highly dependent on the situation and whether or not the CEO can be part of that transition. Because just because you're not going to be CEO anymore, I've seen a lot of CEOs who are like technical or product oriented founders. They lead product or they lead technology, and they're happy to do that because that's what they're really good at. And they don't want to be dealing with the investors and setting KPIs and goals. They just want to make product. And so it really depends, right, on the situation and on whether the founder stays.
Now, speaking of founders and startups, through your experience, what would you give as your top 3 pieces of advice to any new founder or startup when they decide to start growing their business?
Yeah, I'm sure you get a lot of interesting answers to these questions. So let me think through my 3. So the first one is definitely, despite the fact that you have to be delusional to be a startup founder, there has to be a piece of you that is honest about the probability of success, right? You have to understand, in the back of your mind at least, that you're probably not going to be successful doing this. So you need to be honest about what it is you're trying to get out of this. And hopefully it isn't to become a multimillionaire, because that's not likely to happen. But a lot of other really great things can happen. So be honest with yourself about the probability of success is the first one, I would say. The second one is understanding, I would say, the lifestyle that being a startup founder is going to force on you, and understanding like how to create boundaries and how to keep those boundaries. Because if you don't, it'll kill you. I had a startup for 5 or 6 years, and we had, by any measure, a lot of success. And from a lifestyle perspective, it was extremely difficult. By the end of it, I was physically ill from the stress over the course of those years. And so I think from a lifestyle perspective, you and your loved ones and your friends need to know what you're getting yourselves into. And then the third one, I would say, is you have to do a lot of upfront work to make sure that you are in alignment with your co-founder and or early team members. A lot of people go into this with, hey, let's make this work. Do you want to be a part of this? Great, let's go. And they don't spend time on having difficult conversations about how decisions are going to be made. And ultimately, at the end of the day, who's in charge and what are your values? What are you looking to get out of this? And those conversations typically don't happen at startups. And so I think my third one is to choose your co-founders and early team very carefully, and to make sure that you are having early, open, candid conversations about why are we here? What are we hoping to get out of this? And how are we going to treat each other?
We've heard versions of that. We've also heard the comparison that, like, when you have a startup, you and your co-founders, like a marriage, or just, you need to be able to have that kind of open, candid conversation in order to move on. Now, Brian, if anybody wants to reach out and get a hold of you and maybe find out what other services and skills you can offer, where can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn. I have a book time with me button on my LinkedIn profile that I'm honestly, I say this seriously, always happy to have conversations with people. My contact information is also there. You can message me directly on LinkedIn as well. I think that's the best way, since I don't have a formal company website or anything like that.
We'll put the link to your LinkedIn in the show notes for this.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Brian, for joining us. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, David. Really nice to meet both of you. It's been a fun conversation. I appreciate you having me.
On that note, we are out. We will be back next week. Thanks, everybody.
That wraps up this episode of the BizDev Podcast. And this time you get me, Jen Baxter, co-owner of Big Pixel and David's wife. Yep, I finally took the mic, or wrestled it, away from David. BizDev is a production of Big Pixel, a US-based provider of UX design, strategy, and custom software. This podcast is edited by audio whiz Matt McCracken and Christy Pronto, marketing guru for Big Pixel. Want to connect? Shoot us an email at hello@thebigpixel.net or find us on Instagram, Facebook,